My daughter-in-law walked into my kitchen, pointed at my savings, and called $200,000 idle cash. My son stood behind her and said nothing. 2 hours later, they tried to access my account. So I didn't argue. I changed the passwords, killed the card, changed the locks, and booked a one-way ticket out of my own life. The sound of rain drumming against the windows of my house in a quiet suburb of Seattle was the only thing breaking the silence. I'm Nora, 66, a widow, and officially retired. I was just pouring myself a cup of tea when my front door swung open. My son Julian and his wife Clara walked in without so much as a knock. Clara didn't even wait to take off her wet coat. She marched over and dropped a brochure for a luxury new development in Bellevue right next to my teacup. "Nora, we've made a decision," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This house is perfect. We just need the down payment." I looked down at the numbers, $200,000. It was a staggering amount, exactly the sum my late husband and I had spent decades saving for my golden years. Julian stood in the background, staring at his shoes. He didn't say a word. I took a sip of my tea and looked at Clara. "It's a beautiful house," I said quietly. "But how do you plan on financing this? Your job at the gallery is hit or miss, and Julian is already working overtime." Clara let out a short, hollow laugh. "We aren't financing it alone. You have that money sitting in your savings account. It's just idle cash, Nora. We're family, and Julian is your only heir. Why wait?" In that moment, it hit me. They already saw my life savings as theirs. They didn't see me. They saw an ATM with a pulse. I didn't feel angry, just a sudden crystal-clear coldness. I set my cup down and said 3 words, "I'm saying no." Clara froze. The mask of politeness slipped, and for the first time, I saw the naked greed in her eyes. They thought I was a fragile old woman they could push around. They forgot who had been running this house alone for 10 years. The energy in the kitchen shifted instantly, and I knew this evening was just the beginning. Clara's face turned a blotchy red. "No! What do you mean, no?" she hissed. She stepped closer, trying to use her height to intimidate me. "We already talked to the realtor. He's expecting a confirmation by tomorrow morning." I looked over at Julian, who was still practically glued to the doorframe. "Julian, did you tell her that I make my own decisions regarding my money?" I asked calmly. He cleared his throat but refused to meet my eyes. "Mom, come on. It's an investment for all of us. You'd have a room there. A room." In my own life, I was the head of the household, and now they were offering me a room in exchange for my life's work. "I don't need a room in Bellevue," I replied. "I have this house. It's paid off, and it's mine." Clara slammed her hand on the table. "This house is outdated and way too big for you. You're being selfish, Nora. You're sitting on a pile of cash while we're trying to build a future." I stood up slowly. I'm not a tall woman, but in that moment I felt untouchable. "Your future is in your hands, not my safe. Now I'd like you to leave. It's late." Clara gasped. "You're going to regret this. You're all alone without us. Who's going to take you to the doctor? Who's going to keep up with the yard?" She didn't wait for an answer. She grabbed Julian by the arm and dragged him out into the rain. As the door clicked shut, I sat back down. My heart wasn't even racing. I felt strangely light. I knew they wouldn't give up. Clara was manipulative and Julian was too weak to stand up to her. But they had made one fatal mistake. They underestimated how tech-savvy I was with my own finances. I grabbed my iPad and logged into my bank account. It was time to check the access I'd given Julian years ago for emergencies. The battle had just begun. 2 hours later, my phone started vibrating incessantly. It was a text from Julian, but the tone was pure Clara. "Sign the mortgage papers or don't expect to be part of this family anymore. We don't have room for selfishness. Think long and hard about your choice. I read it twice. They were threatening to cut me off if I didn't hand over my entire net worth. It wasn't a request. It was an extortion attempt. Instead of replying, I set the phone aside and opened my banking app. Years ago, I'd given Julian power of attorney over my checking account in case something happened to me. A quick glance confirmed my suspicions. He had tried to access my high-yield savings account, where the $200,000 sat 3 times in the last hour. Because the account required a secondary authorization from me for large transfers, he had failed. With steady fingers, I revoked his access. I changed every password and set up 2-factor authentication on a secondary Google Voice number they didn't know about. Then I checked my credit cards. Clara had an authorized user card for errands she supposedly ran for me. I looked at the recent statements: high-end perfumes, expensive dinners, designer shoes, all filed under the guise of helping mom. I deactivated her card with 1 click. It was nearly midnight. I didn't feel sad anymore, just deeply determined. They wanted to isolate me. Fine. I'd be the one to burn the bridge first. I pulled up a travel site. I'd always dreamed of an extended stay in Maine, where my cousin Martha lives. It would be snowing in Portland right now, exactly what I needed to clear my head. I booked a one-way ticket for the following evening. As the confirmation code popped up, the phone buzzed again. Clara was trying to call. I turned the device off and went to sleep. It was the best sleep I'd had in years. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. The house felt different, brighter, despite the gray sky. My first stop was the desk in my late husband's office. I had to make sure they couldn't get their hands on any other documents. I found the copy of my will. Up until now, Julian was the sole beneficiary. I set it aside. I'd deal with that later. This wasn't about revenge. It was about self-preservation. I went down to the basement to my small floor safe. That's where I kept the physical passbooks and some emergency cash. To my horror, I realized one of the envelopes was missing the one containing about $10,000 in savings bonds my parents had started for me decades ago. Julian must have pocketed it during his last visit. He still remembered the code from when he was a teenager. I immediately called my local bank branch. The manager, Sarah, had known me for years. "Good morning, Nora. How can I help you?" I told her my documents had been misplaced and I needed to freeze everything. "Oh, I'm glad you called," Sarah said. "Your son was just in here trying to cash some bonds. Since he wasn't a co-owner, we had to turn him away." My stomach dropped. He really went through with it. "Lock it all down," I said firmly, "and make a note that all prior authorizations are void." After I hung up, I packed a suitcase. Just the essentials: warm clothes, my documents, and photos of my husband. I left the rest of the house as it was. I called a local locksmith and paid extra for him to come out that afternoon to change every lock. I wasn't going to let them strip the house bare while I was gone. Every move was precise. I wasn't the prey anymore. I was the director of my own exit. My Uber to the airport was scheduled for 4 p.m. At 2 p.m., the locksmith arrived. He looked a bit confused when I told him I wanted every exterior door rekeyed immediately. "Security first," I said simply. While he worked, I walked through the garden. I loved my roses, but I knew they'd survive a while without me. I left a note for my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, asking her to collect the mail and water the indoor plants. I turned my phone on just long enough to confirm my ride. Messages flooded in instantly. "Julian, Mom, why is the card declined? We're at the register. Clara, this is beyond petty. You're embarrassing us. Unlock the funds now." I deleted the messages without finishing them. There was nothing left to discuss. If you build a relationship on money, you lose it the moment the faucet runs dry. As the Uber pulled up, the locksmith handed me the new keys. I tucked them into my purse, feeling the cool weight of the metal. I got into the car without looking back. SeaTac Airport, please, I told the driver. As we drove through the familiar streets of the suburbs, I felt a strange sense of peace. I wasn't a vengeful woman. I was a woman who had finally drawn a line in the sand. At the airport, I checked my bag. I sat in a terminal cafe and ordered a glass of Chardonnay. I turned my phone on one last time to send a single text to Julian. The locks are changed. The access is gone. I'm away. Figure out your own future. Then I took the SIM card out, snapped it in half, and dropped it in the trash. I bought a prepaid burner phone at a kiosk for emergencies. When my flight was called, I felt a flutter in my stomach I hadn't felt since I was 20. Maine was waiting, and for the first time in a decade, my life belonged entirely to me. The flight across the country was long, but I used the time to think. I didn't feel guilty. Why should I? I'd given Julian everything: a great education, a head start in his career, and unconditional love. The fact that he allowed Clara to turn our relationship into a transaction was his failure, not mine. In Portland, my cousin Martha met me at the gate. She's a few years older than me and has a dry Maine wit. "You look like you either just robbed a bank or broke out of prison." She laughed, giving me a bear hug. "Both," I replied, breathing in the crisp, salty air. "I reclaim my life." We drove to her place near the coast. It was cozy, filled with books, and smelled like wood smoke. Martha didn't grill me with complicated questions. She knew the gist of it from our emails over the last few weeks. She knew I needed quiet. That first night, I slept so deeply, I didn't wake up until noon the next day. After breakfast, I opened my laptop and checked my email. There were several from Julian, each sounding more desperate than the last. He wrote that they'd had to stall the realtor, that Clara was having a nervous breakdown, and that I owed it to them to call. He even threatened to report me as a missing person. I just smiled tiredly. I sent a short email to my bank manager back home, asking her to strictly block any further communication from my son and to inform him that I was in perfect health but wished for no contact. I was safe here. The 3,000 miles of distance was exactly what I needed to snap the emotional chains. Clara and Julian had no power over me here. The weeks in Maine drifted by. I got used to the rhythm of the coast, long walks on the rocky beaches, and late-night talks with Martha. My bank manager, Sarah, eventually sent me a secure message. She reported that Julian and Clara had shown up at the branch multiple times. Clara had apparently made a scene claiming I was mentally unfit and needed to be put under a guardianship. Sarah shut them down cold. I told Martha over dinner. She told them she'd spoken to me personally, that I was sharp as a tack, and that any further attempt to mess with my accounts would result in a police report for elder abuse. Martha nodded. Good for her. It's not that easy to take someone's rights away just because they won't hand over their checkbook. But what shocked me most was a message from my neighbor, Mrs. Gable. She told me that Julian had shown up with a locksmith of his own to try and get into my house. But because I'd hired a professional security firm to monitor the place and warned the neighbors, Mrs. Gable called the cops immediately. Julian had to tuck tail and leave before things got ugly. It was painful to see how far they'd go. It was never about me. It was about the house and the cash. Julian was just a shadow of himself now, a puppet for Clara's bitterness. I felt a brief flicker of pity for my son, but it was quickly extinguished by the realization that he was a grown man. He'd had a choice. He could have said stop the moment Clara started planning how to spend my savings. He didn't. I decided to extend my stay in Maine. I was in no hurry to go back to a home that was being besieged by my own family's greed. In mid-February, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. It was Leo, Julian's best friend since grade school. He wrote to me privately and very carefully. Nora, I don't know the whole story, but Julian is a wreck. Clara left him the second it became clear the money for the Bellevue house wasn't coming. She told him he was a failure who couldn't even handle his own mother. I stared at the screen. Clara was gone. The house of cards had collapsed the moment the foundation my money was pulled out. Leo went on to say that Julian was living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment and barely spoke to anyone. He was reportedly humiliated by everything that had happened. I sat in silence for a long time. Martha walked in and saw my face. "What is it?" I told her. "Are you thinking about going back?" She asked softly. I shook my head. "Not yet. And not for him. If I go back, it's for me." The news of the split didn't give me any satisfaction. It was just the logical conclusion. Clara never loved Julian. She loved the lifestyle she thought I would provide for her. I didn't reply to Leo. Instead, I sent Julian a postcard from Maine. No long letter, no accusations. Just a picture of a lighthouse and one sentence. "Sometimes everything has to fall apart so you can see the ground you're actually standing on. I still need time. Mom." I wanted him to know I was alive, but I wasn't ready for a reconciliation. He needed to learn how to stand on his own 2 feet without using my bank account as a safety net. I had reclaimed my life. Now he had to find his. That was the greatest gift I could give him as a mother, the cold, hard reality of personal responsibility. 3 months later, I landed back in Seattle. It was May, and the city was in full bloom. I felt strong, rested, and clear-headed. My first stop wasn't Julian's apartment. It was my house. It was a little dusty, but untouched. The security service had done their job. I opened all the windows and let the spring air chase away the stale silence. I made an appointment with an attorney. It was time to finalize things. I updated my will. Julian remained the heir, but with strict conditions. He wouldn't inherit the house until he turned 50, and my savings were moved into a trust that would pay out a modest monthly stipend for his living expenses, but forbade any large one-time withdrawals. I wanted to make sure no one like Clara could ever blow through my life's work in one go. Then I called Julian. He sounded old on the phone, his voice shaking. "Mom, is it really you?" "Yes, Julian. I'm home. If you want, we can meet tomorrow afternoon at that coffee shop by the water. Just us." The meeting was quiet. Julian had lost weight and the spark in his eyes was gone. He tried to apologize, eventually breaking down into tears. I held his hand, but I kept my distance. "I forgive you, Julian," I said firmly. "But things will never be the way they were. I am no longer your bank. I am your mother. And that is all I am going to be." He nodded, swallowing hard. He knew he'd crossed a line and there was no going back to the old comfort. Clara had already moved on to someone else, I'd heard. She was a chapter that was officially closed. I looked at my son and knew we had a long road ahead of us, but at least we were finally standing on solid ground. A year has passed. My life in Seattle has stabilized, but it's different now. I travel a lot more. This winter, I'm headed back to Maine, maybe for 3 months this time. Julian visits once a week. We talk about his job, the weather, normal things. He never asks about money. He knows that topic is off limits. He's working at a smaller firm now, making less, but he seems more at peace. The weight of trying to meet Clara's demands has vanished. Sometimes I look at him and see the boy I raised before materialism clouded his judgment. He's learning that respect isn't something you can buy. I've made some changes to the house too. I renovated the upper floor and rented it out to a grad student. Not because I need the money, but because I like having life in the house. She helps me in the garden sometimes, and we share a pot of tea. It's a relationship built on mutual respect and clear boundaries, exactly what had been missing from my own family. When I sit on my deck today, I often think back to the moment I booked that one-way ticket. It was the bravest thing I've ever done. I learned that being family doesn't mean being a doormat. True love respects boundaries. I'm 67 years old, and for the first time in my life, I am truly free. My money is secure, my home is my sanctuary, and my soul is at peace. I am no longer a safety net for someone else's greed. I am Nora, and I live by my own rules. And that is the most beautiful success I could have ever imagined. Sometimes you don't lose a family, you lose the role they forced you to play. And that is where freedom begins.